I've seen so many new psych nurses make these mistakes, but it's actually not their fault. Hey, what's up guys, it's me, the Psych MP David C. If you're new to psych nursing, you're probably making mistakes that you don't even realize are mistakes. It's not because you're bad at your job, it's just because psych has its own set of rules. So in this video, I'm gonna walk through some of the most common mistakes that I see from new nurses, with real life examples and how they actually play out. Let's talk about it. Starting with mistake number 1, trying to be liked by every patient. It's natural for us human beings to want to be liked by other human beings, but it becomes a problem in psych, especially when you try to appease the other person too much, especially a patient. Okay, so for example, let's just pretend your unit has a rule where each patient only gets one snack. But then you have a patient who's asking this new nurse for a second snack, but that new nurse doesn't want that patient to dislike them or be upset with them. So in order to prevent that from happening, the new nurse decides to give the patient a second snack, even though it's against the rules of their own unit. The new nurse is thinking that the patient will end up liking them more because they gave them a second snack, but it's actually going to lead to a lot of problems. By doing that, the patient learns that rules are negotiable when they shouldn't be. Rules should be enforced definitely on a psych unit. And by making an exception for this patient, that means you should also be making exceptions for all the other patients. If you have another patient who asks for a second snack, you really have no reason not to give them a second snack since you did the same thing for the first patient. And then a third patient sees that and they'll ask for a second snack, and you can see how this starts a chain reaction. The patients will also learn that escalation gets rewarded. They'll see if they ask nicely, that staff will say no, but if they escalate a little bit and get upset, then they'll get what they want. And that's never a good thing. It also increases staff splitting. Let's just say another nurse takes over and the patient asks them for a second snack, but they stick by the rules as they should and say no. The patient can just be like, oh, well, that new nurse over there gave me a second snack, so why aren't you? And then the nurse that's actually doing the job correctly and not giving them a second snack is kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place because they don't really have a good answer to that question besides that new nurse isn't following the rules, which isn't a good response. And then if the new nurse keeps doing that, then that new nurse and other staff members are definitely going to have a rift between them. The majority of the staff aren't going to like that new nurse because they're enabling these patients this way. So yeah, trying to be liked by every patient and bending the rules for them is definitely just going to cause more problems. You can avoid this by giving short, neutral responses. Don't try to over-explain yourself or anything. And always try to set consistent limits. That means coordinating with your team members on what those limits are so everyone's on the same page. And then maybe just read a book on how to say no to people. But yeah, anyway, trying to be liked by every patient is definitely a common mistake that I see with a lot of new psych nurses. And then moving on to mistake number 2, taking patient behavior personally. As I'm sure many of you know, in psych nursing, you're gonna get called names a lot by the patients. For example, I've heard patients say you're the worst nurse ever. How did you even get your license? You're dumb as hell. And a lot of other things that are a lot more harsh than that. A lot of new nurses will take these insults personally and they'll replay it in their head all shift. They'll get mad themselves and be like, oh my God, I can't believe this patient just called me that. And then their behavior towards that patient changes. They'll start neglecting that patient because they don't want to talk to them. And sometimes they'll even take that anger home with them, which is never good. This is a problem, obviously, because it causes emotional exhaustion. It also accelerates burnout. And it decreases your confidence for sure. You just have to remember that you represent the system, not yourself. Meaning any other nurse in that situation would get called the same names as you. The patient is just taking their anger out on you because you just happen to be their nurse at that specific time. Also, another thing that might help is talking with your coworkers afterwards. Now, I'm not saying you should talk crap behind the patient's back with your coworkers, but pretty much just letting them know what happened so they can comfort you and instill some reassurance and confidence back into yourself. And then also try to avoid talking about this outside of work, because if you keep talking about it outside of work, it's going to stay in your head forever and that patient is going to be in your mind rent free. And you definitely don't want that to happen. So yeah, a really common mistake I see in new psych nurses is taking patient behavior personally. And then moving on to mistake number 3, talking too much during escalation. If there's a patient who's like visibly upset and like is clenching their fists or even like punching their fists together like this, and they say they're like ready to punch the next person who puts their hands on them, if you start talking too much to them, it's actually going to trigger them even more. Like, just pretend you start like trying to explain things to them. First of all, when they're in that state, they're not going to be able to like rationally think about things. So there's not much point in like explaining things that they need to comprehend. And then also, if you just keep talking, they're just going to interrupt you and like make their voice even louder and just escalate further. So basically, in that state, the patient can't process logic, and having someone try to talk to them too much just increases stimulation. So you can avoid this by using like brief, calm phrases, like use short words, short sentences, don't give them too many options, slow down your speech a little bit, and then also learn that sometimes silence is a way to de-escalate patients. Sometimes all a patient really needs is like a quiet, private area to themselves for a little bit, and they can calm down on their own. But yeah, talking too much during an escalation is definitely a very common mistake among new psych nurses. And moving on to mistake number 4, poor documentation. Now this one isn't as much of a big deal as the previous ones, but it still happens a lot among new nurses. Like, for example, I'll see new nurses chart something like patient has poor judgment and poor insight, and that's it. But instead of charting that, you should be charting like how you know the patient has poor judgment and poor insight. Like, what are they doing? Like, if the patient keeps raising their voice and they keep interrupting people, that shows poor judgment. And if the patient doesn't know the reason why they're in the hospital, then that shows poor insight. So in documenting, you should be like describing the behaviors that you see in order to support your assessment. Don't just say like patient is anxious. Document how you can tell the patient is anxious. A lot of the times you can see like what other nurses have charted on that patient. So you kind of like look at their notes and see what they wrote. I'm not saying copy their notes, but just look at theirs as an example and then let that help you make your own notes better. And also make sure the nurse of the notes that you're looking at is a good nurse. And then moving on to mistake number 5, saying the wrong things. I've seen so many new nurses and even veteran nurses say like the wrong word choice to a patient, which ends up just like escalating the patient even more. One example is using the word why. Like, why are you doing that? Why are you not taking your meds? Why are you acting up? Which is also a bad word, like acting up. Because if you ask someone why they're doing something, it's going to immediately put that person into defense mode. So they're going to feel like they have to defend themselves because, you asked the question why. Instead of asking like, why aren't you taking your medication? You could say something like, okay, so like, what's your concern regarding taking the medication? Instead of asking like, why are you doing that? You could ask like, hey, what's going on that's making you feel this way? And that invites like a more calm and like genuine answer than why are you doing that? And then there's this one nurse at my hospital, whenever she offers a medication to one of her patients and they don't want to take it, she just goes like, okay, so you're refusing. And anytime I hear her say that, I'm just like, God, there's so many other things you can say to that patient instead of, so you're refusing your meds. You could ask them like, hey, like, what's your concern regarding the medication? Is there any particular reason that you don't want to take it? That encourages the patient to express their concerns so you can better meet their needs. So yeah, definitely try to avoid saying the word why. And there's a lot of other words you should avoid too, like, crazy and stuff like that. Hopefully over time, you'll learn which words are like bad to say to patients. And you're not like the nurse I work with who says refuse like every single time. Okay, so those are some of the most common mistakes I see in new psych nurses. Making these mistakes doesn't mean you're bad. As long as you learn from these mistakes, then you'll be fine. I probably made every single mistake on this list when I was new too, but yeah, just learn from your mistakes. Have you made any of these mistakes yourself or like seen someone else do it? Let me know in the comments down below. If you found this video helpful, make sure to like and subscribe. I do videos twice a week on psych nursing stuff. I am also on TikTok and Instagram if you want to follow me over there at the Psych NP David C. I do telehealth medication management for adults living in California. If you're interested, there's a link down below. And with that, your mental health just leveled up. You're welcome.